White Blade, the podcast that's going on. Listen up, we're here to involve from gadgets to friends we never lose.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the very first edition of the AI Blade podcast. My name is David Willis-Owen, and I'm very excited to begin sharing my thoughts with you over the voice medium instead of just having to write them down. So I recently completed a blog post about indirect prompt injection, and I'd like to talk to you today about what indirect prompt injection is, why it could be a threat, the ways which threat actors could leverage this in the future, and how they're currently doing so. And then looking towards the future, why could this become a really big issue? And why is it imperative for us to learn now about how to prevent these kind of attacks? So to begin with, let's think about regular prompt injection. Most people understand what regular prompt injection is. It's when an attacker supplies input to try and obfuscate a large language model from doing what it's supposed to do. It's trying to get it to go against what it's been told by the developer. And I think we've all seen this happen. When ChatGPT was first released, within a few days, people on Twitter were telling it how to make bombs, how to make drug recipes, etc. And this is also colloquially known as jailbreaking. So prompt injection, while it is fun, it's somewhat pointless and harmless in my personal opinion. There are definitely use cases, but all of this can be obtained from online without too much effort. So when we look at indirect prompt injection, the next evolution, if you like, in large language models has been to allow them to connect to other resources on the internet and read data. For example, reading location metadata from Google Maps, reading hotel reviews, summarizing web pages. All of these are existing applications which are built into the large language models in some capacity. So when this happens, as soon as the read operation happens, then the large language model's context is poisoned. It's poisoned because an attacker could theoretically have implemented a prompt in this read, and from then on, the large language model could be acting off the attacker's instructions. This is bad. As soon as an LLM reads external data, it's compromised. And application developers, this is the last thing you guys want to hear. I've seen a lot of app devs burying their head in the sand and then carrying on with doing operations past this read, and that is where a lot of the source of the issues of indirect prompt injections arise. We'll go into that later, but for now, let's just consider reading in data. Of course, the large language model can now be influenced to socially engineer the person using it. This is fascinating. So people could be telling the large language model to trick the user, hosting this, and then the large language model reads it and actually delivers all this misinformation to the end user, which is a very interesting use case. However, it doesn't have a direct impact. The final and the most scariest application of indirect prompt injection we are seeing currently is where a large language model can read in data from some kind of source, and then it can also write data in some medium or send out data. For example, emailing an arbitrary user, just like in the maybe ChatGPT plugin, adding comments to posts, all of this stuff. And when this is done, a nice attack chain arises. This was originally catalogued by Embrace the Red last year, which is a very good blog. I highly recommend you check that one out. The author of that came up with an attack chain where an attacker hosts a prompt on a website. The victim asks the large language model to summarize this web page. As soon as the summary occurs, the large language model reads in the prompt and then acts based on the prompt. What it then does is it calls a plugin to send out an email to another user. Finally, this large language model also has access to read the user's emails as well. So what it can do is it can summarize the user's emails and then send out that summary to someone else using the different plugins in ChatGPT. This time last year, there was the ability to use more than one plugin in the same chat. And this created all sorts of strange scenarios where lots of different functionality could happen. And the large language model was this melting point of trust boundaries, if you like. So there are some really interesting attack vectors off the top of this. Basically, if the large language model reads data and it can then write it in some format, it is vulnerable. It is vulnerable. And why is this so important? Well, first of all, because it can be used to leak the confidentiality aspect of the CIA triad. For example, if someone has discussed something private with the large language model and is then induced by the indirect prompt to summarize this and send it out, then that's a huge issue. That's a huge issue. The next and scarier issue is this AI has only seen large consumer uptake in the large language model space over the last 18 months. That's where we've seen a lot of innovation and growth in the IT space. However, this technology will be integrated into trains, cars, critical life support systems. And when this happens, we've seen, based on the last 20, 40 years of IT, things don't get re-engineered too much. They get reused. And so if any of these indirect prompt injection bugs are inherited into the future where AI is powering way more critical systems than a simple text input and output, we could be dealing with some major issues. So how can we defend against large language model indirect prompt injections? Well, there are a few ways. The first method of doing this is to ensure that the large language model cannot output data to an external source after it has taken an input. I believe Gemini is already implementing this in some capacity, although this isn't foolproof. This can be bypassed with clever prompts, and it's a mistake to solely rely on this as a mechanism to thwart indirect prompt injection. The next step which can be used is taking an instruction hierarchy. So OpenAI released a paper last month to do with this, where a large language model can be instructed to take its system prompt as one of the highest priority inputs, and then tool outputs to be very low priority. So this means it will be much harder to influence a large language model to act based on the information hosted on a web page by an attacker. However, this is simply making it harder. And if there's one thing we know from information security, if something's not impossible, someone will find a way to bypass it. Whether that's tricking the large language model into thinking the tool output is the system prompt, whether that is putting keywords to artificially inflate the priority of the tool output, there is a lot of scope here. Finally, is having a human gateway for large language model actions. So when a large language model is about to send out an email, then pop up a notification. ChatGPT Plus already does this, and it is terrible. It is terrible. It just comes up with an approve or deny button and says, do you want to take this action? It doesn't even specify what the action is. It just says that it's communicating with an API. This isn't good enough. And if we know anything about users, they never read the notices. I'm sorry, newsflash, users don't read notices. They hit approve as fast as they possibly can. They don't read privacy notices and they don't take heed to what is going on. So this is not a solution. And there's no simple answer to indirect prompt injection because it stems from prompt injection, and prompt injection is inherent to large language models because they can take in any input. So yeah, to wrap things up, I think this is a very interesting topic. We will see lots more attacks in this space, a lot more research. I'm personally currently finding vulnerabilities in ChatGPT plugins which I will be disclosing over the next few months as I'm allowed to in the 90-day responsible disclosure period. And I'm really looking forward to see what the future holds in the indirect prompt injection space. Okay, now that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to my first ever podcast. If you have any feedback, feel free to let me know. I'm always more than happy to answer any questions. And have a fantastic rest of day. Look forward to seeing you on the next one.
I play.